Good evening, and welcome to the Mill Valley Historical Society's first Wednesday speaker series, which we hold the first Wednesday of every month at the Mill Valley Public Library, but for now, because of the pandemic, it is safely online. My name is Deborah Schwartz, and I'm a board member of the Mill Valley Historical Society in charge of the first Wednesday speaker series and the oral history program. We have an amazing lineup of talks this year. I'm especially excited about tonight's presentation, Flying High with Big Brother and the Holding Company and Janis Joplin. Our guest speaker is artist and Big Brother percussionist, David Getz. But before we begin, I want to say thank you to the members of the Mill Valley Historical Society. Thank you for your support. And if you're not yet a member, we hope you will be soon. Our membership is very affordable and just a click away on our Mill Valley Historical Society website. Your membership ensures you will be alerted to future monthly speaker presentations like tonight. You'll receive Chuck Oldenburg's charming Mill Valley history vignettes, and you'll be regularly updated on other historical events in our town and nearby. Also, I'd like to say thanks to the Mill Valley Library for allowing us to continue our speaker series in this safe and accessible format. Tonight's talk will be an informal Q&A interview that lasts about an hour. We'll have photos. After, we'll make time for questions from the audience. For practical purposes, the audience must be muted for this webinar. But with us tonight is Natalie Seidemann from the Mill Valley Public Library History Room, and Natalie is here to help us manage this format. Thank you, Natalie. For those unfamiliar with Zoom webinars, here's a brief tutorial on how things work. Functional tools are located at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see them now, just hover your cursor over the area and they should appear. Now, look for the chat icon. The chat tool allows you to post comments, say hello to friends, and we encourage you to share your own thoughts and recollections about Big Brother and the 60s during tonight's event. The raise hand and remove it. We won't really need this tool tonight, but let's give it a try. Raise your hand if you love rock and roll. Okay, and now click again to remove the raised hand. Finally, and this will be very helpful for tonight, the Q&A option. You may have questions for Dave. This is where you can post those questions, which I will read to Dave after his talk. But if you have comments to add, the chat function is the best place for that. Okay, so on with the show. I first met Dave Getz over a year ago when I interviewed him for our oral history program, and it's a fantastic interview. And I'm going to have to apologize in advance because our short hour tonight isn't enough time to begin to tap into the wealth of his history and experience as an artist, a performer, a teacher, and member of one of the most popular bands of the 1960s. I do recommend you listen to Dave's oral history. To find it, just Google Dave Getz Oral History, Mill Valley Public Library, and you can listen to the audio, read the transcript, or both at the same time. Dave began to work as a professional drummer at the young age of 15 in jazz and dance bands in his native New York. As a teenager, he toured Europe with his traditional jazz group, Rick Lundy and the Saints. Though most well known for his drumming with Big Brother, he has performed, recorded, and toured all over the world with numerous jazz and rock groups, including Country Joe and the Fish, It's a Beautiful Day, Jose Neto, Bruce Langhorne, The Dinosaurs, and many others. But Dave is also a visual artist and earned a Master of Fine Arts degree from the San Francisco Art Institute. Before joining Big Brother, he was the recipient of a Fulbright Fellowship in painting. His art has been exhibited in galleries and museums in the US and internationally. He has taught both art and drumming throughout his career at the San Francisco Art Institute, the College of Marin, and several secondary schools in the San Francisco Bay Area. Dave and his lovely wife, Joan, are the parents of 2 daughters and live here in Marin. Hey, Dave.
Hi,
Thanks
Deborah.
so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
I see one of your paintings first off. I've been nervous about this event. I wanted to tell you, and normally I'm not too nervous, but I have been about this event, and I finally realized tonight before we began, it's because it's so meaningful for me. I am of a generation that, and for some people they may feel the same, and also they may not understand depending on your age, but in the 60s and into the 70s, there was a lot of social turmoil. And many of the people, the young kids and teenagers and young adults that attended your shows and Big Brother and other shows in San Francisco and around, it wasn't just that they were running away from home, which some did, but many were running to sanctuary, because that's what music was for many of us in a confusing time. It was sanctuary, and it was accessible in venues such as the Avedon and the Fillmore and other places, as well as the radio. And so I know that that's where I went for sanctuary, and your album was one of my favorites. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story and for sharing your history. And we've had lots of talks, you and I, since the interview, and time together as friends and in preparation for this tonight. And it's clear to me that you really are a man throughout your life, actually, that art and music have been dominant themes. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Okay, well, first of all, just let me say that this is completely new to me too. I've never done this before. I've performed, obviously, music in front of thousands of people and all kinds of things. And I've even done performances and shows in front of people, but this is the first time a Zoom kind of thing where I can't see. I know there are people out there, but I'm talking to a screen. So it's interesting. But this is maybe what it is now. So I didn't plan to become a musician. I basically started out playing the drums when I was about 14, and by accident I got into a band. I was asked to be a drummer because what I really was interested was Native American dancing and crafts, and I belonged to an Indian dance troupe that did Native American dancing, and you had to play the drum. And some kids in my junior high school heard me play the drum and do Indian dancing, and they said, you have rhythm, so we want you to be the drummer in our band. But that was never my intention as a career, to be a drummer. But all through high school and into the probably through the end of the 50s, I played in a lot of bands. I played a lot of club dates, and I just was kind of a natural good drummer. I just could do it. I was actually in a band before I took any drum lessons, which is kind of crazy because these kids said, well, you can do that. And so I said, okay, get me a set of drums. And then I took lessons, and then I played in a lot of bands, and I played a lot of what we used to call in those days club dates. So I didn't play that much rock and roll. Most of the musicians I knew, kids who were teenagers then, we were all kind of wannabe jazz musicians who played bar mitzvahs and weddings and things like that in hotels in the summertime in the Catskill Mountains. And I did a lot of that. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be an artist. So I went to art school, and I got into Cooper Union Art School, which is a very good school in New York. It's free. And then from Cooper Union Art School, I was going to go to Yale. I was going to go to Yale to finish my graduate degree, but I met somebody in the summer of 1960 from California who was at the Art Institute, and I thought, I'll just get in my car and drive to San Francisco and see if I could go to the San Francisco Art Institute, which is what I did. I got in my 49 Plymouth and drove in 3 days to San Francisco, and I got there and I registered for school. And then two weeks later, I ran out of money, and they wanted me to pay tuition. and I couldn't do that. So I had to go and work in the post office for a year to get the money. And then I went back to school and I got a master's degree in fine art. And during that time, for probably about 6 years, I didn't play the drums that much, except every once in a while at school parties, at Art Institute parties, which were incredible, wild, crazy parties. Way before psychedelics or anything like that, just probably on red wine, everybody got crazy. And we had a Dixieland band that was made up of painters, of teachers of art. And that's the only time I ever played the drums. And then the psychedelic thing came along in the mid 60s, in 65 and so on like that. And I started to go to some of the early dances. They were at the Longshoremen's Hall. And it was very far out because you'd see all of these people that you had no idea that so many people like yourself who were kind of artists or bohemians or whatever you wanted to call it at that time. The name hippie didn't even exist yet. We were all kind of still beatniks, but we were all sort of starting to experiment with psychedelics and things like that. And these bands were starting up. And Big Brother had already started. I knew about Big Brother and the Holding Company. They were one of the bands like the Jefferson Airplane, the Grateful Dead, the Charlatans, bands like that, that were playing at these events. And anyway, then I met Peter Albin. I don't know if you have a picture of Peter, but I met Peter. Yeah. Well, this gets into other things. This is eventually I joined Big Brother and the Holding Company, and I heard them play. I went to a dance and I heard them play, and I had met Peter, the bass player, and I won't go on too long with it, but I got into this band. I became the drummer in this band. And when the band first started, this is before Janis. Slow down. There's Peter. So there's Peter before Big Brother. Peter was at San Francisco State, I believe, and he was kind of a folk musician living in the Haight-Ashbury, playing blues and folk music. And he had met Sam Andrew, another guy in Big Brother, and that's Sam. And they started this band, and the band became one of the bands playing at that time. Anyway, before Janis was in the band, the main person in the band was this guy, James Gurley. And James was a very interesting guitar player. He was like, it's hard to almost describe. He played with finger picks and he played very, very fast, but it was almost like free jazz. It was almost like modern music. It was like sound and noise and things like that that he got out of the guitar that wasn't like traditional way of folk blues or anything like that, but it was really astounding. It was really powerful. He just was really going for it in some way, just producing these noises and sounds and things from the guitar that were just extremely expressive. So he was the featured guy in Big Brother and Holding Company, and in some way we used to call it freak rock. We sometimes would just play for long periods of time on stage with no song or no format, maybe just a beat, an idea that we had. And anyway, James was basically the main figure in the band. And go back a little bit to, there's a thing called the blast. That stopped. So this is a very typical of, like, in the early days of Big Brother and the Holding Company, something that we did. And it was a place on Washington Street near Polk in San Francisco called the Contemporary Dancers Ensemble. You can see that there. And this guy had this idea that he would put a rock band on one side of the stage, a jazz group, a free jazz group on another side of the stage, and he would have dancers in the middle. And then in the orchestra pit, there would be a woman who sang opera, who played the piano. And there would be projections going on, like a light show of projections of cartoons and different things like that. And there was no rehearsal. It was just like we showed up and whatever happened, happened. It was completely spontaneous and just kind of like an art idea. And that was something that only a band like Big Brother and the Holding Company could do at that time. It was very typical of like our approach to music, which was just very far out and avant-garde, and almost like it was like, in some way it was like punk, but it was psychedelic punk. It was like we would play everything very, very fast, and the intensity and the power was just all important. The energy was what it was about. And also the dances in those days. I was talking to Deborah the other day about this, And it's something that was very different because when all of these events happened, the first events at the Longshoremen's Hall and the Fillmore and the Avalon, it was almost more like the bands were catalysts rather than entertainers. The bands were more like playing music and everybody was dancing and everybody was getting high. And it was like kind of like a celebration of life. It was something, it's almost like medieval in a way. It was not like people coming to hear a band that's sitting down in seats and listening to songs. It was more like a happening, an energy, and some kind of a celebration of just being alive and being in the time and something new happening, some new vibration. So that's what Big Brother was, I'd say, before Janis.
I have a question. Did you felt, well, first of all, let's back up just a little bit. How is it that you actually became a band member? You were teaching art, as I recall. You were in San Francisco living this fabulous bohemian artist lifestyle. It's one of my favorite parts of your interview, in fact, is the San Francisco you described through the artist's eyes and the way that you lived and the community you lived with, the people you lived with. It just is fabulous. But you're in this art world, and then all of a sudden you're in the rock and roll world. What happened?
Yeah, what happened?
What happened?
Well, I mean, it wasn't like the Art Institute was very, very underground and bohemian. And there was even, a band that came out of the Art Institute before Big Brother. It was one of the first bands. It was called The Mystery Trend with a guy named Ron Nagel, who was a very great ceramicist at the school at the time. But he played keyboards and he wrote songs also. So it's not unusual for artists and musicians to cross over. It happens a lot. But I wanted to be an artist. And I should say this, Deborah, early on, I didn't want to be a musician because when I was growing up, being a musician meant being kind of like a servant. You were kind of not treated that well. And of course, we weren't playing rock and roll. Like I said, we were playing weddings and bar mitzvahs and hotels and things like that. So it wasn't like the prestige that rock and roll had at that time. And I didn't see it as I loved to play, always loved to play. And I didn't practice enough to really be like what I thought would be a bebop, great jazz musician in New York at the time. So I just played occasionally. I thought art was what I really felt like excelled at, what I really in some way was on the top level of in my life. I was winning scholarships and I was, getting into the best schools. But anyway, I had a studio in San Francisco. I was teaching a class in painting. I was teaching 2 classes in painting at the Art Institute. And I was also working a job at a restaurant called the Old Spaghetti Factory in North Beach, which was this great place in North Beach where a lot of stuff happened. And I lived in North Beach. I had an apartment and I also had a studio where I painted that was in the Mission District. And one day I was eating lunch in a cafe that was below that studio. It was on 18th and Bryant. And I saw this guy with long hair and I started talking to him just because he looked like a freaky guy. And it was Peter Alban. And he said, I'm in a rock band, Big Brother and Holding Company. And I said, I've heard of that band. You got one of the bands that people are starting to talk about. And they were playing that weekend or the weekend after at the Fillmore at an event that was for the peace movement. And I was involved in the peace movement at the Art Institute. I was marching in anti-Vietnam War marches and I was, all of that was going on at the time, which was a big thing. And anyway, there was a peace rock and I was going to it anyway. So I went to it and I heard the band and then I saw Peter afterwards and we talked about the band. And I thought that the band was incredible, except for the drummer. And this is the truth. And it wasn't just because I wanted to be the drummer of the band. It was because they were such a powerhouse of energy, but the drummer didn't have that energy. He was kind of weak. And so I said, if you guys ever get rid of that drummer, give me a call because I play the drums. And Peter had actually come up one time to my studio and he'd seen the drums there. And I think he said, I heard you practicing once. But anyway, long story short, they fired that drummer and they were playing at a club in San Francisco called the Matrix, which is Marty Ballin started that club to play, have a place for the Jefferson Airplane to play. And they were playing for like 3 nights straight at the Matrix. So I went, and the first night they had a drummer named Fritz Kasten, and he was a good jazz drummer, but he wasn't powerful enough. And the next night they had a drummer named Norman Mayall, who played with the band, eventually played with the band, the Sopwith Camel. And he was a good rock drummer, and I think they wanted him, but he had another offer to be in this band, the Sopwith Camel. And they had a hit on the radio called Hello, Hello, which is a funny song. We won't go there. But anyway, so they called me, maybe in desperation. I don't know. I still don't know to this day, but they called me up and they said, could you come down and rehearse with us? So I went and I set up my drums and we rehearsed, and we just started playing some blues. Actually, I remember what it was. It was 2120 by the Rolling Stones, 2120 blues. And we just started playing, and it just went on and on and on. And we played for like about 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour. And it was like, okay, that's it. I was the drummer in the band.
During your interview, you told me this fantastic story about a moment of truth for you, where you have to decide, as the band's doing better and better, you have to decide, are you going to be an artist? Or are you going to be a musician?
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you to tell that story, because it's something like San Francisco's version of the Odyssey. One thing after another, catastrophe, ecstasy, and a final answer. So
yeah.
please.
Yeah. It was a big moment, and it's a great question for me in my life, because it's a real turning point in my life, because I was on this track to have a career as an artist, and I probably would have wound up teaching art. Maybe I would have been the head of the art department at some small college. I don't know. A lot of the people I graduated with, who I got masters with, who got Fulbrights at the same time as me, that's where they all wound up. They had gallery shows, and they taught at the college level, and so on and so forth. And I was headed in that direction. And I was working in this place, as I said. I was working as a cook in this restaurant in North Beach called the Spaghetti Factory. And in the kitchen there, people used to hang out in the kitchen. Sort of, it was kind of like an underground scene. There would be poets and artists and things like that. And there was a big table in the kitchen while we worked that people in North Beach would sometimes hang out. And this guy was hanging out for a while. His name was Bob Seidemann, who was a young, aspiring photographer. And I got to know him a little bit. And one night we were talking, and I was cleaning up the kitchen. I'm getting ready to leave, go home. And we started to talk together, and we said, let's take acid together. Let's drop some acid together. And I had this pharmaceutical LSD that had been given to me by a girlfriend who had gotten it legally when LSD was legal, which was only about a year before that. So we went and we took it, and we started walking around North Beach. And at one point, I saw a bunch of kids in a red Mustang, a guy and 2 girls in a red Mustang park. And I said, well, we ought to go with them. And Bob, being the kind of person he was, said, okay. And he walks up to the red Mustang and starts talking to them. And he waves to me and says, let's go. So we get in this car with the people we never saw before in our lives. And we're coming on to lots of heavy acid. And the car starts to drive, and we're going what was then the Embarcadero Freeway. It's not there anymore, but it was the way you went from San Francisco to the Bay Bridge over to Oakland. And they were going to Berkeley, and they said, you want to go to Berkeley with us? I said, sure, we'll go anywhere, So we're in this car, and somewhere going over to on the Embarcadero Freeway, going to the bridge, the girl who was driving got maybe a contact high. I don't know. I still will never explain it. But she started to lose control of the car, and the car eventually hit the lower wall. It could have, if it had gone over the wall, it would have dropped about 50 feet down the street. We would have been dead. But someone grabbed the wheel, and then we hit the upper wall. And anyway, we banged around on the freeway for a while, and the car was kind of squashed, and we got out of it. The guy who was in the front, the 2 girls, one girl and the guy were in the front. And the guy who was in the front had sort of gone through the windshield and come back out. And so we had to sort of flag down a semi, a big truck. And we got ourselves to the hospital. We got ourselves to San Francisco General Hospital out on Potrero Street. And then we spent the next 6 or 7 hours in the emergency room of the General Hospital, high on acid, with just so much stuff going on. It was just, one of them. It's not, nowadays when people talk about LSD and they talk about, controlled thing where you lie down on a couch with a therapist and you play nice soft music. This was like just everything the opposite of that. It was a car wreck, and then just, the emergency room of the General Hospital while they bandaged this guy's head up. And we saw people being wheeled out. We saw death. We saw birth. We saw everything go before our eyes. And then in the morning, Bob and I walked back to North Beach to where I had an apartment on Kearney. We walked all the way from way out in the Mission on Potrero, all the way to North Beach as the sun came up. And it was, and then at that moment I said, I'm going to be a musician. That's it. I knew that, and that was before Janis had showed up, but I knew that this was kind of my destiny, my calling, that I was going to just go for this band and not be teach anymore. And really, I was going to stop painting, even though I thought I could paint for a while, and I tried to, but the rock and roll thing at that time was we had to live together. We had to really devote ourselves 100% totally to being in this band, and that's what everyone did.
And this is the photo of you after you've made up your mind, and you are now part of Big Brother.
And this photograph was taken at the spaghetti factory when I was still working there. I still had a job. This was in sort of an alleyway to the side of the old spaghetti factory, a restaurant in North Beach.
I have to ask you, why Big Brother and the Holding Company? What's the name? The significance of it?
I wasn't there when they made up the name, and the story that I've been told a zillion times is that they just threw a bunch of names in a hat, and one of them was Big Brother from the George Orwell 1984 book, and the other was the Holding Company, which is a legitimate name for a company like Google, for example, is a holding company because they own lots of other companies, so they are called the holding company. But at that time, the word holding was a synonym or a pseudonym for when someone had dope. Are you holding? They would say, usually meaning grass or pot. But sometimes if you were, serious junkie, it probably could mean that too. But it was you had drugs on your person.
Yeah. Okay, so before we talk about Janis, because we'll segue into that, I wanted to ask if you felt that Big Brother had you described the guitar playing, the sensational guitar playing that was in the band. But do you feel that the band itself was striving for something, a particular sound at that point, or did it evolve as you progressed in your experience and once Janis came aboard?
The particular sound of the band in the early days was very much determined and, as I said, centered around the sound and style of James Gurley's guitar playing. Although Peter Albin sang, and we would do a lot of covers. Peter Albin would sing Little Richard material. He did. We did a couple of Chuck Berry things. We did, stuff that rock bands in those days did. We did Little Richard. We did some blues, Howlin' Wolf. We tried to do some Chicago blues. One of the things that's funny about it, we did Hall of the Mountain King from the Peer Gynt Suite. We did Summertime. This is before Janis joined the band. We did Summertime as an instrumental. So it was an interesting thing that people associate Summertime, of course, with Janis and Big Brother. But we actually were playing that song. We just went in any direction that we wanted to. We had things where we just would, something we called Electric Caravan, where I would just start a kind of a tom-tom beat, and we would play for like a half an hour over that and not know where it was going to go or where it was going to end. But the sound was pretty much controlled by James's guitar. He had such a particular style and sound that was the predominant sound of the band. And then when Janis came, of course, we had to start doing more songs. We had to start thinking in songs. And the first thing, of course, was Janis and Peter both had, and James to a certain extent, had a common background. They'd both been folkies in the early 60s. They'd both been part of the folk roots music and blues music scene. And Janis was more like, coming from, she knew a lot of folk music, but she knew a lot of like early blues, Bessie Smith stuff. She knew Odetta things. She knew a lot of folk blues, Josh White, and things like that. Um, some gospel things, some folk gospel things, some white Appalachian things. And the same thing with Peter. Peter knew that stuff because he had been in a band called the Liberty Hill Aristocrats with his brother. That was a bluegrass folk band with Robert Hunter from the Grateful Dead was also in that band. So they were all coming from the background of the early 60s of folk music. James, a little bit. Sam, not so much. Sam had been in a rock and roll band. He'd growing up in Okinawa and places like that. And he'd been playing rock and roll all his life. I would do nothing about a lot of this stuff. I was coming from jazz and traditional jazz and early rock and roll. I knew a lot of the early rock and roll because I listened to a lot of that when I was growing up in New York. I listened to a lot of early rhythm and blues in the 50s, in the early 50s, Alan Freed and stuff like that. So I knew some of that stuff. But anyway,
Okay.
Janis and Peter were trying to figure out what songs they both knew in the beginning. And then gradually, as we got those down, Janis would say, well, here's a song that someone wrote for me, Powell St. John. And we would learn that song. Or here's a song I wrote. Then Sam would say, okay, I just wrote a song last night. And we would start to do songs, more like songs.
Question. You were a all-guy band. Why did you even want a female singer? What was the impetus to getting a lead female singer?
God, it's kind of really an obvious thing because Peter just didn't think he was a good enough singer, and I probably would have to agree with that. He could scream. He could kind of scream like trying to be Little Richard and stuff like that. Sam in those days wasn't singing at all. James once in a while would sing, but he had a kind of a very small voice. And the most popular band was the Jefferson Airplane, particularly when they got Grace Slick to leave this band, the Great Society, which is one of the popular bands. They got Grace Slick to leave the Great Society and join the Jefferson Airplane. And the Jefferson Airplane had a record. They were the first of these new bands to have a record and a record contract. And they were just probably on top of the pile. They were just the most popular. And they had songs. That's a different thing. They were much more they were different than the Grateful Dead and Big Brother in that they were much tighter and they had more like formed material. And so there was a certain sense that if we were going to make it, we had to get a strong singer and probably a female singer because it's just a thing. It's just the kind of thing that happens in music. Guys with a female singer. It's changing now which is wonderful. It's wonderful. You have bands with a lot of female instrumentalists and maybe guys singing. Who knows where it's going to go? But in those days, this was sort of a common format, and we thought we should maybe try to find that format and get a really strong female singer. We auditioned a few people, and of course, most people know the story. Chet Helms, who was our manager, and also the managing the family dog, had come from Texas, and he knew Janis very well from the Austin music scene. They'd both been in Austin together. They'd both actually been in New York together. They were friends. They were Texas friends. And he basically got Janis to come out and join Big Brother and Holding Company. That's a whole story in itself. But that's how it happens. She was sort of talked into coming back to San Francisco, which she was very afraid to do that. She was very afraid to come back to San Francisco because she'd been in San Francisco in the early 60s and she'd had a lot of trouble. She'd gotten strung out on speed and she had a lot of trouble. She'd gotten busted. She'd gotten beat up. She had a very, very bad relationship go sour and a lot of things. So we can talk about that in a few minutes. But she didn't want to come back to San Francisco. She was afraid to come back to San Francisco. And Chet basically talked her into it to join or to basically be the singer in this band that he thought she would fit perfectly with.
And we've got this great photograph, and your friend Bob, let's back up to the picture of Janis. Your friend who you went on that wild San Francisco adventure in the evening of truth, he took that photo, right?
Yes. So Bob Seidemann was the guy that we got in we took the acid together and got in the car wreck. And we became very good friends. And he was, at that time, an aspiring photographer. And of course, he became friends with and part of the scene with Big Brother and the Holding Company. I brought him into the band, essentially. And then he did this eventually. For the first picture he did was James, was the picture you showed before of James with the feather. That was the first picture he did of the band. Eventually he did this picture. There's another picture of Janis and I that
we'll go through them, and you can point out Bob's pictures as we go. Okay.
Bob became sort of like one of the really important photographers in the San Francisco rock scene. He did pictures of a lot of people, but he did one very famous picture of the Grateful Dead where they're all in Daly City, standing in a street in Daly City, a bunch of like very tract houses going back in the distance. Anyway, Bob was a great photographer. He left this world a couple of years ago.
When we'll point out his photos as we go, because they really are great. Once Janis joined the band, and then in other musicians that I've interviewed, seems every really great band has their own house. And that's what happened with you. You all moved together. You were together all the time and you moved to this house. Will you talk about this house and how things changed for the band and your relationship with Janis?
Shortly after Janis joined the band, we decided that we all should live together and play and rehearse every day and have some kind of like a communal life together, which was a big thing. For me, it was a big thing because I had to give up a studio and an apartment, which was in a great apartment. For Janis, it was really almost necessary because she was living with this guy, Travis, who, was just a relationship of convenience, I would say. They were living in one furnished room on Pine Street, which was a funky area then. One furnished room with a bathroom down the hall. And James and Sam were living with a lot of people in the Haight-Ashbury band, instead of houses where there were like, 25 people living. Peter had married and had a baby, and I think Peter might have had an apartment that he gave up, but I'm not sure about that. But anyway, we all moved into this house, and it was in Lagunitas, out in West Marin. And the house had been built by a man named C. Clinton Hart Merriam. He was he was one of the first California ethnologists. He was a friend of John Muir. He was a friend of Teddy Roosevelt. And he studied Miwok Indians, and well, I could go on about. We didn't know all of this at the time. The only thing we knew is that it was sort of like a lodge, and it was a big place. And the woman who rented it to us said Teddy Roosevelt had slept here, and we didn't know whether to believe her or not. But it actually turned out to be absolutely true, because he had come to visit Clinton Hart Merriam, who built the house and around the turn of the century. So anyway, we all lived in this house together, and we rehearsed every day. And in that time, we all became, like a family. Although the dynamic of that is also like a family, in that people have different styles of living, and there was a real conflict between lifestyles. You had basically, I wasn't like a big drug person then at all. I maybe was getting high and taking acid once in a while. But James's wife, Nancy, and Sam's girlfriend, Rita, were into speed. And they would like shoot speed and stay up all night and string beads. And Peter and Cindy didn't do drugs at all. And they had a young infant child. And they wanted to go to bed at regular hours and eat meals at regular times and have food in the refrigerator and all of these sort of basically normal things that you need for life and security in a way. But anyway, there were these really big conflicts of lifestyle. I would say Janis was somewhere in between. And I would say also that what I think most people know in biographies about Janis is it was during this period of time when Janis got back into shooting drugs again, because the temptation of being with Nancy and Rita and staying up all night and doing that kind of thing was too much. And it wasn't long before Janis's worst fears about herself, in a way, were becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, as they say.
Well, before we go there, looking at this picture is about as sweet as any little friendship can.
Also a Bob Seidemann picture.
Bob Seidemann.
Taken by Bob Seidemann, who was in the room at the time. And we had just come back from Chicago. We had gone to Chicago and played for a month in a club in Chicago called Mother Blues. And that, there's no time here to talk about that, because that's like a mini series in itself. But we lived together also there for the most part. We lived in Peter's uncle's house in Glenview, and we were in Chicago for a month. And while we were in Chicago, a bunch of hippies came through in a van that were traveling across country, sort of like a Ken Kesey idea. They were caravanning across country, and they were making this drug. They were manufacturing this drug called DMT, which was like, if you smoked it, it was like mixed with tobacco. It was a liquid. It was very toxic. It smelled like a big chemical thing. And they put it on tobacco, and you smoked it, and you became like almost like a psychedelic high for 15 or 20 minutes. And then you came down. And anyway, we were given a bunch of that by these people. Janis was. They gave a bunch of it to Janis, and we never did any of it. And we came back to Lagunitas, and this one day she sort of broke it out, and she said, "Let's see what happens with this thing." So we had
this picture, is that when that happened?
We had just smoked DMT, and it's yeah.
I have to comment on the outfit. Well, both of yours, but hers in particular, because she became so famous for her look.
Absolutely right. And this is before that. This is her East Texas clothing that she came with, basically. This is,
how old is she
her huaraches. It looks like her huaraches are tied together, but they're not. And my sandals and my cut off jeans and Goodwill shirt. I mean, this is before we any kind of inclinations of like fame or notoriety or national, anything. We were just this band in the backwoods of Lagunitas, practicing every day and doing drugs, which looks like it was a lot of fun at that time.
And you're how old, and how old is she here?
I am 26 and she's 23.
Okay, now we'll take another look at another picture, and here you are in your yard. Yes,
it's on the deck. It's a deck at this house in Lagunitas. So here's a little story, just a quick story. I mentioned that we went to this club and played in Chicago. We moved into this house in Lagunitas before that, and we only had lived in the house maybe 2 or 3 weeks when this offer came to go and play in this club in Chicago for a month. And we were going to do it. Everybody was very excited about it. And we said, well, Peter, I think, announced it. We were all sitting out on this deck just like this. And he said, we got this offer to go to the club, Mother Blues, and we're going to get $1,000 a week, which was an enormous amount of money in our minds. And we're going to play for 4 weeks there. Jefferson Airplane has already played there, and they were a big hit. And Janis says, I got to tell you guys something. And we said, what? And she says, this person, he's a big name producer. His name is Paul Rothschild. And he saw me perform. He saw me sing with you guys. And he asked me to come down to LA, and he wants to put together this all-star band. And he's going to be the producer, and he'll get me a house, a car, and pay for everything. And he's going to put this band together, an all-star band. And in the band is going to be Taj Mahal, is going to be the other singer. And I think one of the guitarists was going to be Stefan Grossman, who was a very, very well-known, highly reputed folk blues guitarist at the time. Maybe Ry Cooder was another person. I'm not sure. All of these LA session guys and great players were going to be in this band. And she said, I don't know what to do. And she was crying and we didn't know what to say either, because we had this offer to go to Chicago. And she was saying things like, you know, I don't know what to do. I've always been a nobody. I've always really wanted to make it. Just a lot of things. And there was no pressure, except I think Peter finally said to her, look, we have to know whether you're going to come with us or not, but you could always come with us. And then if it doesn't work out, you can do this other thing. It's not going to go away. And she thought about it. She said, okay, I'll come with you guys. I'll do it. And that was her big turning point, because I always say to people to this day, what kind of Janis would have turned up? What kind of Janis would Janis have become if she had joined that band, as opposed to, you know, the next year and a half, 2 years in Big Brother and Holding Company? And I see a whole completely different picture. I don't think, in my own opinion, I don't think she would have been the same singer that she became if she had done that. She would have been very good. I mean, she was always going to be very good, and she was very good then. But this is just my opinion, that I think she would have wound up being more like Bonnie Raitt or Bonnie Bramlett or Tracy Nelson or someone like that. But anyway, there was something about Big Brother that demanded a kind of like form, a kind of expressive, a kind of going for it, going for broke thing and going over the top, that definitely affected her, and how she, you know, where she went with her singing. And that's after Chicago. That was after Chicago.
You two had a particularly close relationship, didn't you?
We were always like brother and sister, Janis and I, you know. I mean, in the very in the very early days when I drove her around, when she first joined the band, we would drive around together because I had to pick her up every day and take her to rehearsal, because I lived, like I said, I lived in North Beach, and anyway, she lived in kind of Pine Street, the Fillmore, Upper Fillmore, and the rehearsal was sort of near the Castro, so it was like halfway. Anyway, we would spend a lot of time together. We would sometimes, after rehearsals, we would go to North Beach, where she loved North Beach and she loved the bars in North Beach. So we would go and shoot pool and drink and hang out in North Beach, and, you know, and sometimes we would make out in her car, like kind of like puppy love, like just kiss and neck, and, you know, just like teenagers.
You're young. You don't need to tell us.
But it was never going to be anything other than that. It was like, that's the way our relationship was. And you know, we were always friends.
How would you describe your friend, her personality?
Boy, you know, that's like the question. I told you this the other day, Deborah, I think. I said, if someone asked me what was Janis like, you know, that kind of question, so general, like what's her personality like? You know, I'd have to sort of make up some kind of crazy answer, like if Billie Holiday and W.C. Fields had a baby. Something that doesn't make any sense. No, her personality was multifaceted. So that, you know, there's a lot of sides to her, a lot of aspects to her. We'll get into that later, because that's one of the things that
Okay, so let's go on to the next pick.
Yeah, okay.
You're all cleaned up here.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not crazy about this picture, but this is another Bob Seidemann picture. I'm sort of embarrassed that I wore
By
pants
your
like
outfit?
that. My pants, yeah. I mean, God, what was I thinking? What was I thinking?
What is it you said?
I like the shirt, though. The shirt, it's a nice silk shirt.
What is it you said about German Shepherd dogs?
Janis's dog George was a kind of a collie mix, like I don't know what it was, collie lab maybe. A great little dog, you know.
Then you said the hippie dog was you had,
Oh, I didn't say that. Sam said that.
which was,
Sam said that it was like sort of having a big German Shepherd was sort of a hippie badge in those days, something like that. I don't think so, really.
I don't know, you all look pretty good. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Very slick.
Yeah.
And next picture. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Enter. Well, before we talk about the fame part of it, you had mentioned in our many talks about how in the early years of 1965 to 66, the band and the audience were in a dynamic and active dynamic together. But then you've got in 67, the Monterey Pop Festival, which is a seminal event for Big Brother and the Holding Company, and Janis
absolutely.
Joplin got to be one of
Yeah.
the moments of the pop festival when she sings Ball and Chain.
Yes.
But the audience dynamic was different because now you're on stage and the audience is watching.
Is watching and listening. Yes.
So there's a shift going on now.
Definitely a different thing. Like I tried to mention a little bit before, and it didn't really last long. The initial thing of what the dance concerts and the Trips Festival and the early dances at the Longshoremen's Hall were about didn't last a long time. It was sort of over by the end of 1966, for sure, I would say. And that's why a lot of people who, like myself and people of my generation, we used to sometimes say, well, the Summer of Love was actually 1966. It was the year before the Summer of Love, because that's when sort of it was innocent. It was like a sweet time when it wasn't kind of people coming in from all over the country, and it was different anyway. And it was more this kind of spirit, the spirit that when the bands played at the shows, the band was a catalyst for the energy, and people were there to create an energy, to get high, to find some kind of ecstasy, to achieve ecstasy through the music and through dancing and through the communal vibe that was there. And I'm not, and drugs played a big part in it, because a lot of people were taking psychedelics and coming to these shows. So there was a lot of like really just people expressing themselves very freely, dancing and looking at each other and connecting with each other. And the music is going on while all of this is happening, but no one's like sitting on the floor listening to the band or listening to how good they played, or hey, that's a guitarist who really, he's got great chops, or any of that kind of thing going on. It was just the music mostly being a catalyst, and there was a lot of equality between the audience and the musicians. We didn't feel like we were so much on a pedestal. We felt we were special in that we were the catalyst for the energy. But I think in Bill Graham had a lot to do with changing that. Monterey had a lot to do with changing, but it naturally changes because there's records, and people started listening to records and songs and hits, and then this music suddenly became the charts, became the popular music. Radio stations like KSAN all of a sudden emerged, stations that played the music of the bands that were playing in San Francisco, which didn't exist before. Pop radio was a whole different thing. It was very separate from this music.
Well, Cheap Thrills was a great success. Let's see the album cover again. And it was #1 on the charts for 8 non-consecutive weeks in 68, and was regarded as one of the great albums of the year. Let's go back, Natalie, if you can put the album cover on again, because it's a sensational cover. Where is she? There you go. Let's see it again. Because of the art. Now,
yeah,
how'd that happen? How did you get our crumbs to do this?
Well, we signed with Columbia Records, and they have an art department. And right away, they were trying to figure out. We knew that we were going to do this album. We didn't know what it was going to be called even. We didn't know it was going to call Cheap Thrills, but we knew we were going to have to make an album, and we started to do that right away. And somewhere in the time when we were making the album, their art department sort of went into gear, and they said, "Well, what do you want the cover to be?" And Janis, like her first thought was, let's all get naked and get into bed together. So we did that, and they took pictures, and it was not good. It was not, you don't have that picture, thank God. It's not a great picture. It's just not a great photograph, and it's just the whole vibe is wrong. The room is wrong. Everything's wrong. Then they said, we know we're going to get the best fashion photographer in New York to photograph you. So they got Richard Avedon, who basically has a formula at that time. He was, well-known fashion photographer for Harper's Bazaar and Vogue and things like that. And so we went to Richard Avedon's studio, and he did his Richard Avedon. He's basically him, just does what he does. He does his style, which is he turns on a big fan that blows everybody's hair, and he has these big umbrellas with strobe lights, and he like takes a million pictures, and then you select one. And none of it was any good. It just wasn't good, even though it was Richard Avedon, who I, I know he did some great photography. But anyway, we kind of didn't know what to do, and we were sitting around at a rehearsal, and we all loved R. Crumb's comic books. We all loved Zap Comics, which was just starting. And I said, what if we asked Robert Crumb to do the cover? And everybody loved the idea immediately. But how could we contact him? So I said, well, I know this guy. I know this guy. He's a doctor, and he's going out. He's actually a med student. His name was Shelley Rosen, and he was a med student at UCSF at the time. And he had come out from Cleveland with Robert Crumb. They'd been very close friends. And I knew I could get Crumb's number if I called Shelley Rosen, who was going out with a friend of my girlfriend. Anyway, long story short, Janis said, I want to call him. We got the number, and Janis said, let me call him. So she did. She called him, and he said, okay, I'll do it, but I have to come to one of your shows. So he came to one of our shows. We were playing at the Carousel Ballroom, or it might have been the Fillmore West. It was the same place, but anyway, it became the Fillmore West. And we were playing there, and he came and he sat backstage the entire time. I never really talked to him. He didn't talk to anybody. He just observed, and he kind of took pictures. He took pictures with a camera, and then he just disappeared. And I think like the next day, I'm not exaggerating, it was either the next day or the next night, he calls Janis and says, okay, come and get it. And she goes to his house, and then she comes to the rehearsal. We had a warehouse where we rehearsed. She shows up to the rehearsal a few hours later. She calls all of us. She says, I'm going to go pick it up. And then she comes to the rehearsal, and when she walks into the rehearsal, says, you're not going to believe this. So there's like two things he's done. And the front cover is a picture of stick figures, and he's got all of the photographs he's taken of us with our heads cut out on these stick figures, and we're playing fake instruments or drawn instruments on a stage. And it's all drawn like stick figures on a stage, but the heads are pasted in. And this is the back cover with all of the song titles and the information. And we look at this, and all of us go, this is incredible. Like, this has to be the front cover, So that, I said, long story short, that's what happened. He didn't like that. Crumb didn't like that, but the front cover never got used. And they basically, Columbia decided to use this as the front, and on the back to put a big picture of Janis. And on the inside, when you opened it up, would be a picture of the whole band playing at the Fillmore East. So that's the way it happened.
Now, by now you're starting to go into full-on celebrity status. How did that affect you all?
Oh, well, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know. Celebrity is kind of, I guess it's the right word in New York anyway. In New York and LA, it wasn't so much in San Francisco. When we came back to San Francisco after touring or recording in New York, we all felt like we were home, and we just had friends, and we'd hang out with their friends, and we could go anywhere. In New York, there definitely in New York and LA, there's definitely, at that time, there was a real status thing about, in rock and roll, hierarchies. And we were like, we'd really made it at a certain point. I guess after Monterey, we were elevated into the hierarchies. And John Phillips of the Mamas and Papas invited us to come to his house in Bel Air and get high, that kind of thing. And we got invited, we played at the Cheetah in LA, and we got invited to a party at Peter Fonda's house. And we were like, uh, there were girls, there were women offering themselves to people in the band. And Janis was, having same kind of thing, young guys who wanted to, who were willing to sort of sleep with her. And I mean, it was that kind of thing. The sex becomes kind of like, thrown at you when you're in that kind of hierarchy in rock and roll, in a lot of music, and actually in art too, and in a lot of things, probably in baseball too. It's probably in all kinds of celebrity areas. So your people open up, levels of wealth and things like that open up to you and all of that. And it's a heady experience, and it's kind of a burden too. It starts to really interfere in a way, or it can interfere with your ability to really be just an artist, be what, to keep on track of what really was your motivation to do this when you were 14 and 15 in some way. What brought you to this form, this music, this art, or whatever that really is great about it, and not to sort of like become this other thing. Anyway, I don't know if we could handle it. I don't think any of us handled it well at the time. And so, it
Many of
had
our conversations,
repercussions.
or a few of them, you mentioned that at that point, as the pressure increased for performance, because now your audiences are going to getting larger and larger and larger and larger. And Janis has become this persona. Now she's this persona 24/7.
Mhm. One of the things you've got to understand about Janis, which it hasn't, it's like apropos of nothing, Deborah, but just since we're talking about Janis, we should talk about Janis as a singer, and just what one of the things that makes her great is this sound, is that she has this sound, which I don't know if it's something that a singer can develop. Maybe it's just a gift, like people obviously like Billie Holiday has it, and there's other singers. Edith Piaf has a certain sound, and Janis is one of those singers. She's immediately identifiable. So she had this incredible gift, which wasn't quite there when she joined Big Brother and Holy Company. It kind of like it was born during that time. By the time she got to Monterey, and maybe a little after, probably even, I think it really reached its zenith, her control of her sound and what the sound was, and when we did Cheap Thrills. And then I think later on it was there for sure. It's certainly there for sure in all of her recordings. But she did lose some of her high range. She lost some of her high range from heroin use. I think that happens. It lowers your voice. But she certainly still had her sound. She always had this sound, aside from the fact that she could hit the notes and that she really knew how to sing the blues, and really could learn things from black music at that time, absorb things from black music that a lot of other people couldn't, was what really made her great. So I just want to say that as has nothing to do with anything, except that since we're going to talk about Janis, we should put that out there, that as a musician, as a singer, aside from all of the other stuff, all of the drugs and the image and the myth, the mythology, and all of that, she has to be recognized um, as a singer. And it's important because she's did so much for women, um, as a figure, for she's really, I think, um, just a very important figure in empowerment of women and women artists.
Next pick,
Okay.
Natalie. There, we got a next one. There. Now, at some point, Janis decides to go off on her own. And talk about this poster, if you would.
It's funny. There's the old perennial swastika and the side there. These guys. Anyway, we played a lot of shows for the Hells Angels, and some of the people in the Hells Angels, at least the San Francisco or the Frisco Hells Angels, were kind of really good people. There were some really interesting people in that. But as a bunch, as a group, they're violent, and they're dangerous people. Anyway, Janis, this poster was a dance put on by the Hells Angels in San Rafael. There was a place called Pepperland. It's where the old Litchfield's motel was on East Francisco. And so there was this club called Pepperland. It was a big ballroom. And Hells Angels wanted to put this dance and asked Janis, who had this new band. He was just starting. It was the last band, which became the Full Tilt Boogie Band. They wanted Big Brother, we were separate then. We had split up. And our singer then was Nick Gravenitis. So we played this show on Pepperland. And Janis hadn't named her band yet. She was calling it Main Squeeze. It later became the Full Tilt Boogie Band. But they were not together. They were not really, don't show that yet. They were not organized yet. And what happened was while Big Brother was playing our set, and it was a crazy set because some girl jumped on stage and took all her clothes off, and some guy jumped on stage and took all his clothes off, and a lot of crazy stuff was happening. And Janis, meanwhile, is backstage in Big Brother's set, before her set, and she's walking around sort of holding court, drinking a bottle, I think, of Jim Beam, with a bunch of angels sort of following her and being on the side. And she's talking and sort of holding court. And some guy who was from another biker club came into the group and said, "Hey, baby, let me have a swig of that." And she said something like, "Fuck off, ma'am." And he just hauled off and punched her in the face. And as soon as that happened, all these other guys jumped on him. So there was this big thing that happened backstage that while we were playing, this thing happened, which we heard about after we got off stage. And Janis's face was all swollen up. And so she got on stage and the band started to play, and she never got into the song. She just started talking, and she was really drunk and really kind of maybe high on heroin. I don't know, but she was out of it. And she just started rambling like a rap about how unfair the world is and how badly she's treated, and no one, has ever treated her well. And just, it was like a whole thing that was really pathetic. It was really kind of sad. I mean, she sang a little bit. I don't remember, but it was kind of a disaster for her. So it was, to me, I said this to you, Deborah, before. I've told you, I thought this was one of the first things where I thought, this is not a good sign. This is like a bad sign of where she's going. Anyway, a few months later, after that, when the band was together, and this was the last time I saw it, it was July of 1970, she had her band together and they were touring, and they were going to play San Diego, big arena in San Diego. And she said, "I want Big Brother to open for me there." And the reason I'm sure she did was because she kind of wanted to get revenge. She wanted to sort of like blow us away with her new band. So that's what happened. We played and we were good. And then she came on and she just was dynamite with her new band, the Full Tilt Boogie Band. They were great. And she was very proud. And then we were going back from San Diego the next day. And she and I are sitting together on the plane coming back from San Diego. And she says to me, "I've been clean for 4 weeks and I just feel fantastic. I feel so great. and I'm working on the new record, and I love my band. And don't you think they're great? Aren't they great, Dave? And all of that, just, really proud of herself for being clean and all of that. And then she comes up with this thing and she says, I want all my friends from now on to call me Pearl. And I said, I kind of laughed. I said, I don't know if I can do that. I'm not really comfortable with that. I think you're Janis, and you're always going to be Janis for me. And I don't know what we said after that. We, just sort of dropped the subject. But I thought about it afterwards. I thought, oh man, this is really a bad sign. She's really starting to buy into like becoming the media image, the image that the media has created for her, some kind of like a caricature of it's somewhere between Mae West and I don't know, Billie Holiday, or I don't know what it is exactly, but I think the word the Pearl image and the whole thing that she was starting to sort of act out was a bad sign for me as a person who sort of saw her, when we drove around in my car together, and that we would talk about everything from books to art, and just, she was just this great person that I thought just who knew more about herself than anybody I ever met. Could talk, just really tell her story. But then she was becoming this other thing, and I didn't like it. And then, I never saw her again. That it was probably about, I guess, through July. So it was October. So it was 2 months, basically, after that she died. And she went back. She started using again. And of course, that's what's happened. It's not uncommon that people, when they're, if you're use heroin, and you've been using it, straight for a couple of years or something like that, a lot on a steady basis, and then you stop and then you go back. It's a very dangerous time because you can't use the same amount, and you're very careful. It's just a time when a lot of junkies OD. It's
Our time is
not
getting
uncommon.
shorter, but I'd like to, next slide, if we can here, if we can talk about this briefly, and then I want to just close with a final discussion. And drinks are on Pearl.
Yeah. So yeah, we got the news of her death. It was very traumatic for me. Different things for different people. It was, I think, the Grateful Dead. There's a Jerry used to tell a story about, they were playing, I think, at Winterland or the Fillmore, one of the main places, and someone came backstage and said Janis just died, and they all went like, oh, yeah. Okay, we got to play, and just on with the show. And but for me, it put me out of out of social circulation. I would say for probably about 8 hours. I couldn't deal with it, But anyway, so after she died, that she had actually written up a will. So also another thing about it is that her manager, Albert Grossman, had taken out an insurance policy on her. I know that that's not uncommon for managers to take out insurance policies on their acts. So maybe he had it on all of his, but he did have an insurance policy on her for a lot of money, and so he was able to cash in on that. But she had left a will, and in the will there was, I think, $2,500 or maybe it was $1,500 to have a party after her death. She wanted her friends. So this was and again, it was this club that was the sort of a big. It was the main jazz club in Marin, I would say, at the time. It was on the Red Hill Avenue, the Miracle Mile. There's a dry cleaning factory there now, I believe, that's been there for years and years. But it was a club, and a lot of bands played there, and also some great jazz. They had a lot of different acts there. Mose Allison played there, and different people. Van Morrison played there, and Big Brother played there a number of times. So this is where the party was, and her family came, well, not her family, her brother and sister came. Her manager, Albert Grossman, was there. Some of her LA friends, Bobby Newworth, people like that. I think Michael Pollard was there. Chris Christopherson might have been there. You know, it was great. And then Big Brother played. We played, and other people jammed. People got up and played. But anyway, that was what this invitation. This was the invitation. There was another side to it that had a picture on it, that had a picture of Janis. But so it was, you know, still it was Pearl. And a lot of people to this day come up to me and said, "Oh, I love Pearl," you know, or "What was Pearl like?" And it's, you know, I still can't go there. I don't know Pearl. Pearl was a caricature to me. Janis was the, you know, the real person.
Let's call this last short discussion Delusions and Deliverance, Lessons Learned from the Counterculture Revolution.
You know something? I had something, hold on a second. Let me see if I can find it. And I had probably could read this.
And then we'll take questions after we just finish this last part, because our time is moving along here.
It is. Yeah, you know, I came across this thing actually a few days ago, or maybe a week ago, that was written by Abbie Hoffman, who I wasn't a great admirer of him, but what he said about the 60s I thought was so right on. He said, "We're here to make a better world. No amount of rationalization or blaming can preempt the moment of choice each of us brings to our situation here on this planet. The lesson of the 60s is that people who cared enough to do right could change history. We didn't end racism, but we ended legal segregation. We ended the idea that you could send 500,000 soldiers around the world to fight a war that people do not support." Well, that's sort of true. We can't send 500,000 when we send maybe 50,000. Okay. The big battles that we won cannot be reversed. We were young, self-righteous, reckless, hypocritical, brave, silly, headstrong, and scared half to death, and we were right. So that's, you know, I think that sums it up in a way. There's other things that came out of the 60s too. I mean, we really, we made it, well, he says it there, I think, we made it impossible to sort of say, to ignore that you could just destroy the environment and just nobody would make that an issue.
Okay, final question, and then we'll take the questions that people are, there's just a couple here. What haven't we talked about this evening that you'd like to include?
Nothing. Everything. We've covered everything that there's possibly is to say for sure.
For those of you that have, you know, the interview with Dave, the oral history, and it includes so much that can't be included tonight. I really urge you to just.
What I want to say, actually, is this stuff. It's ginger beer. If you haven't tried it, it's really good.
Anyway, if you want to hear his interview, you can just Google it and you'll get to hear all kinds of stuff. I've got a couple of questions here. One from Maureen. Dave, in this tumultuous and challenging time, what do you hope to propel forward as your legacy? And then she writes, wow, Indian dancing, please weave this tapestry for us. Thank you. Well, I don't know if we have time to do tapestry, but
this maybe sounds cynical to some, but I used to say this to people all the time. I haven't said it in a while, but I used to say I could be an artist and I could, you know, have a show in New York on 57th Street, and I could write a book, which I've tried to do. I could write a book, and I could be on Jimmy Fallon's show tomorrow night. I could get, I could maybe even get a song on the radio or something like that. No matter what I do, when I die, my tombstone is going to say, Dave Getz, drummer with Janis Joplin.
Well, that's sweet.
And I sort of came to terms with that. I mean, I've done a lot of other things in my life. I was after, way after Big Brother, I was a printmaker in Los Angeles, and I was the exhibition chairman of the Los Angeles Printmaking Society. And I taught high school in Nevada for a couple of years, and all kinds of stuff that over the years I've had to do. I've had jobs, I've done other things, but most people, like when people want to become my friend on Facebook, which a lot of people do, and I mostly accept them, but mostly it's because I was a drummer with Janis Joplin, and that's reality. That's that's a much stronger thing in history as a historical marker. It's just and I can't really do anything other than what I continue to do, which is play the drums with other people, different bands. I keep making my art, keep doing what I'm doing.
Okay, next question. This comes from an anonymous attendee. Can you talk about how you got connected with Bruce Langhorne? And did you ever spend time with him at Al Shackman's music studio up in Cummington, Massachusetts?
Okay. Oh, I love that question. I love Bruce. Bruce was one of the greatest musicians I ever worked with. He's pretty much known in folk and blues circles. He played on Richard and Mimi Farina's first albums, and then he played on several early Dylan albums. He was a multi-instrumentalist. He could play almost anything that he could pick up. But he's also known as he is Mr. Tambourine Man. Dylan wrote the song Mr. Tambourine Man about Bruce Langhorne, and Bruce was a great tambourine player. Bruce could play almost anything. And we met in a group. We called it a spiritual school at the time. Other people might call it a cult, but we were called Eureka. Eureka was a mystical school that started with a guy named Oscar Ichazo, was a Chilean mystic who started the school. And both Bruce and I we were part of the school, and we became the music arm of the school in 1975. We all lived together, Bruce and I, and guitarist Al Shackman, who was also the musical director for Nina Simone, and Al and another percussionist, the great percussionist Gordy Ryan, who was a protege of Olatunji Babatunde, a great African percussionist. And we all lived together in Cummington, Massachusetts, and we created music for meditation and for some of the work that we did in Eureka, which is a lot of it was exercises that we called psychocalisthenics and things like that. We had movement things, Zikr, different things that people who are into spiritual practice probably know what I'm talking about. But so that's how I knew Bruce. And then when I came to LA, I decided to move from Cummington to LA. I stayed with Bruce. He was the first person in LA that I knew. And I lived there in his house in Laurel Canyon and recorded in his studio with him. He had an 8-track studio. And then life went on, and I lived in LA for 13 years after that.
Here's the next question from Woody. Love your openness, your honesty, Dave. Any regrets? This is from Woody and Nancy.
People who say they have no regrets, I don't believe it. Yeah, I have regrets. Some of them I can't talk about.
Okay.
They have to do with family, family things. I don't want to get into it.
Oh.
But I sometimes consider what would have happened if I hadn't joined Big Brother and Holding Company, if I hadn't had that car wreck that night on acid. Maybe I would have tried to keep my job at the Art Institute and said, I can only do this band a little bit. I can't commit to it on that deeper level. And maybe I would have had a whole other career. I don't know, I certainly would have a better retirement income than I do now. Most of the guys I know who became like art professors or heads of art departments or head of any department are all my age now, and they all get
Pensions.
$80,000 a year for just being themselves. And that's kind of, and I don't have that. That's not an option for
No,
me.
no rock and roller pension plans.
Well, you know, one makes money continually from royalties in rock and roll, from the work you did. But since the advent of the internet and YouTube and Napster and Spotify, it's very, very little for, unless you are Beyonce, you know, or somebody like that.
Okay, we're going to have to move through these because we've only got 5 more minutes. Prissy Lee, what is your favorite song, Dave?
My favorite, I don't have a favorite song. My favorite song right now is Pannonica by Thelonious Monk. It's
How
been
about
going through my Pannonica. It's a composition by Thelonious Monk. I've been my soundworm all day in my head.
how about with when you were playing with Big Brother and Janis?
I love Piece of My Heart. I love Ball and Chain. I love Summertime. I love all the things that other people love. There were songs that we didn't do that much that I got to play more interesting things on, like we would play All Is Loneliness, which was a composition by Moondog. We don't do it much even now anymore in the new Big Brother. But in those days we did it, and I would get to play some drums on it. Janis would improvise long solo on it. We would take an idea and go freeform, and I like that. Then it was more like a jazz idea of where we, kind of like improvised, but stay within a certain kind of a rock funk rhythm.
Okay, what is from Colette? What was your favorite venue to play?
Let me think. Well, I think in the early days, it was definitely the Avalon Ballroom. No question about it. The Avalon Ballroom was just a great, fun place to play, even though the dressing room was the size of a large modern closet, and there would be like 25 people in it all the time.
Okay. I've got one from Barbara. Did you see Courtney Hadwin sing, the young shy girl from England? I felt like Janis was with her. Amazing. Have you heard her sing?
I've seen so many things like that in my life. So many. She's just like Janis, quote unquote. Young people. We've even Big Brother. A number of years ago, we go out on the road still, although during the last year, obviously not. But Big Brother's been an active band since 1987. We've toured and traveled, and we've had many, many different singers. Some who sound like Janis, and some who don't. But at one point, there was a singer who came along who was a young girl. She was 16 at the time, Jennifer Espinoza, who could sound like Janis. She was amazing, and she's still out there. And there's been others, over the years. It doesn't surprise me. Janis is an icon, and she will always be like someone that can you sound like Janis. I mean, it's a way of singing. It's like I said earlier, it's a style, it's a sound. She nailed it. She got it down. It's iconic. It's like there are a million wonderful singers out there, people who can sing, who have great vocal chops, who sound kind of all the same. There's only one person who sounds like Janis. So that's why there are always going to be people coming up 15, 14, 22, whatever, who do Janis, who can sing like that, who are great. And, but ultimately they're going to have to find something else. They're going to have to find their own style of singing if they're going to have a career in singing.
Well, I'm going to have to close here, but I've got one last question before we finish from one of my favorite singers, Darby. And I think this is the singer. Hi, Dave. You mentioned that you tried to write a book. What became of that? You should have your life documented. Oh, the
Darby, I wish I could. I get started, and it's just like there's just so many things I like to do more than write, and I'm good at it. It's like I'm a good writer, but I just can't squeeze it out. It's like I just have real big writer's block, And that's been going on for years and years. And I've got tons of stuff in my computer. And who knows, maybe someday it's going to happen.
Okay, I'm
maybe
going
it won't.
to read this last one to you. It's not a question, but it's very nice. We can close your talk with this. Hi, this is from Henry. I have no question, but I just wanted to say that this has been an amazing discussion. Thank you. I woke up at 4:45 a.m. local time, Finland, for this,
Henry.
and it was really worth it. All the best to you, Dave. Henry.
Love you, Henry.
Thank you, Henry. Okay, well, I think that just about does it. For those of you who might want to hear more stories about Janis and rock and roll, please check out the oral histories of Marty Balin from the Jefferson Airplane. He has a very touching description of what happened when he heard the news about Janis's death. David Freiberg from Quicksilver Messenger Service, Bill Champlin from Sons of Champlin. The Sons of Champlin moved in to the house in Lagunitas after you guys left, right?
That's true.
And then Terry Haggerty of Sons of Champlin, who describes the translation of the psychedelic experience into music as a kind of creative anarchy. Next month, we have for our first Wednesday, a discussion called Bridges and Gateways, Mill Valley's Ties to the Japanese Tea Garden with Stephen Pitzenbarger. And that is going to be a very interesting talk because Mill Valley has an influence at the San Francisco Tea Garden and here in Mill Valley itself. So I just want to say thank you, Dave. Do you want?
Thank you, Deborah. Yeah, I want to say thank you, Deborah, for doing this and for asking me to do this. And thank you, Natalie, for being there and for bringing up the images. Really great. And thank you for all my friends who I know are out there. I can't see you, but I know a lot of people that I know are listening to this. So thank you all for supporting this. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. And thanks to the audience for coming and for your interest. And we can turn off the computer and go listen to Cheap Thrills or whatever. And that's it. Good night. Stay well. And we'll see you next month.